Good morning. Good morning, good morning. This morning we're going to look at Acts chapter 21 and the second half of the chapter. It's going to be kind of a short lesson this morning. I say that every time, but it is only like 7 slides long here, so I think we'll be, or 6, 7. We'll be all right. So Acts chapter 21. Let me get back over there. I started doing scripture reading and got away from Acts. So let me turn there real quick. Grab your Bible if you have it. Turn to Acts in chapter 21. We're going to look. This is the end for Paul. It's the beginning of the end, anyway. Paul has been and continues to do something very strategic with his preaching of the gospel, his teaching of the good news. He is undermining the very basis of the power differences that our society, the first century society is built on, right? But it's our society too, right? Because that is status differences between us determine a lot of our trajectory in life. And so he's letting the good news about Jesus do the work for him. It's not his own authority, he says, but he's letting the story of Jesus play out with its natural implications. Right? If Jesus died for me and Jesus died for my slave, then we're both on level ground before King Jesus. He's my family member now. I can't treat him the way that I used to treat him. I can't mistreat him. But that message just in itself is threatening, especially to those people who are in power and who would like to stay in power. Excuse me. Give me 1 second. Hey, Neil, can you go get me a little glass of water? I got one of those pint jars. Thank you. Excuse me. All right. Where was I? Threatening to people in power. This message of equality, of everyone is my brother now, especially if they have faith in Jesus. That's threatening to the whole social fabric of society. Even today, where we like to think of ourselves as equal rights and being equal, having equal rights under the law here in the U.S. I would grant you it is a lot better. But that message is still threatening to those people who are in power, whether that's monetary power or political power. And the whole rest of this book, from chapter 21 basically through the end, is Paul on a stage 6 times in front of some sort of Roman imperial representative, whether that's a Jewish representative or an actual Roman representative. He will be accused, and then he will give a speech. And then that speech convinces everybody that he's not a threat, including the judge in front of him. But he is a threat. He's not a threat militarily. That's what they're convinced of. He's not a threat to us physically. But he is a threat to us socially. And so then the question becomes, is what do we do with someone who's trying to promote a way of life that wholly undermines the whole social order of our culture, but who is not using violence to do it? That's the paradox. What do we do with somebody who's trying to change everything, but not at the end of a spear or a sword or a gun? Right? It's similar to the way of exile, right, that we're studying on Wednesday nights. The way of exile. Because Esther, right, is in exile. How does she act? It's not in revolt, but it's not just assimilation either, right? It's resistance through this nonviolent good deeds. And creating, especially when we're talking about the first century here with Paul, and creating these upside down Jesus kingdom communities. Upside down as far as the values of compared to the people around them. And so for Paul, the unity of these Jesus communities goes across ethnic lines. It goes across social and political and gender and every boundary that humans set up to create status and power differentials. Paul believed that those are all just even playing field in front of Jesus. Remember, he says, there is no slave, there is no free. We just read that this morning in our Bible class. So Paul goes to Jerusalem, and he shows up. We saw that last week. He's on his way to Jerusalem. Now he gets into Jerusalem, and he shows up, and a number of the Jewish Christian leaders, right, they say, hey, welcome to town. Listen, there's a lot of people who want you dead around here. There's a lot of people who have come from the places that you have just been from. We're going to find out that they were Jews from the region of Asia. That's Ephesus and that area up in there, right? And so things have come to a tipping point. Paul is not in Ephesus anymore, a majority Gentile city. He's not in Philippi. He's not in Corinth. He's not in Athens. He's in a majority Jewish city now. And Luke, who is writing Acts here, he spends a lot of time looking at Paul's final days. If you look at my book here, chapter 21 takes up, through the end of chapter 28, takes up this much space in my book. It is a quarter of the book, is these last 7 chapters, 8 chapters. So Luke wants to tell us, using 25% of all of his material, he wants to tell us about Paul's final days being in prison and going from prison to prison. And he does this very intentionally. Right? Paul becomes a model to Luke's readers, to us, for how to navigate the tension in the ongoing generations of this Jesus movement. That's us. That was a long, fancy way of saying this is for us. That Luke was looking into the future and saying, I need to tell them about Paul's imprisonment, but not just a little bit. I need to tell them a lot about his imprisonment, because this is going to shape how future generations act. He's teaching the followers of Jesus how to relate to the authorities that are around them, whether it's political authorities or social or any other sort of authority that's in their life. Paul's story is a vehicle. It's a way for him to use the talk about Christians and their relationship to their government, to their culture, and to the other power structures that are around them, because not everything is in the government and not everything is in my neighbors. There's a lot of people who have a lot of money that have a lot of power as well. And so I want us to ask a question, and I'm not going to answer it right now, but we'll get back to it. And that question is, what would motivate any person to go to a city where they know there are thousands of people that want to kill them? What would motivate a person to do that? Think about that for a few minutes while we get some background here for where he's going. Because on the slide behind me, you can see this is actually not a computer-generated model. It looks like it, right? It looks super nice. This is actually a real model in Jerusalem of the temple during that time period. And Herod rebuilt this temple with the blessing and the money from Rome. And so Herod is this sort of semi-messianic figure. And I say that because that's going to become important. This is a model of what is often called Herod's temple. Augustus Caesar gave Herod the title King of the Jews. This is why it was so inflammatory for Pilate to write King of the Jews This is not kind of a dark picture. Really? Oh, wow. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, the bulb is probably going out on this thing. Wow. That's pretty terrible. Sorry about that. The next one is a little bit lighter, but it's not going to be that much better. It's because there's a lot of color in this picture and not a lot of contrast. Where was I at? Herod's temple. Augustus had given the title of King of the Jews to Herod. And so Herod realized this bold new vision for a Roman Judea. And so he started building it physically. And there's very few people, actually, when it comes to historical figures, who have had such a controversial reputation as Herod and his family. Did they do good? Did they do bad? What was the deal with his family? There's a lot of controversy around that historically. But Herod's rebuilding of the temple probably led his supporters to see him as this sort of second Solomon figure, this son of David. That's a term for the Messiah, remember. So they called him son of David. This anointed king of the Davidic line who was going to come. So that's two strikes right there that sort of fall in that messianic category. And so Josephus, the famous historian of the first century during this time period, Josephus mentions a dozen or more Messiah figures that happened during this time period. And so you can see why the Roman commander here in chapter 21 might react like he does later on in the chapter. Because one of those people, he says, was called the Egyptian. And that was in the 50s CE. So around about the 50 AD mark. If you'll notice, so this is the temple. We have the courtyard here. And then we have in the very center, we have the Holy of Holies. And outside of that is the holy place and all that. And then all of those, that building that you see on the left side of the picture, if you can see it, the building is called Solomon's Portico. Portico is the word we get our word porch from. So it was an area that was open, that you could talk in and visit with each other and those sorts of things. Now, if you'll notice though, let me go back. On the far right, on the upper right of the picture, there appears to be like a fortress. And you would be correct, because there is a place called the Fortress Antonia, or the Antonia Fortress. And it was attached to the outside of the temple. And sometimes it's called the Citadel as well. The Citadel, it was first built by the Hasmoneans, and then later refurbished by Herod the Great here, around 35 BC. So about 40, 50 years before Jesus comes on the scene. And Herod did it for his patron, Mark Antony. And so its main function was to protect this temple. And so let me ask you again that question we were talking about. What would motivate any person to go to a city where they know there are thousands of people that are going to try and kill them? This visit for Paul is so important because he wants to bring what? What's the whole point of this trip? It's to bring this huge amount of money he's been carrying around to the church in Jerusalem. This huge amount of money that's been given not by other Jews mostly, but given by Gentiles. This is a show of unity among the churches. He's been collecting this gift from all over the known world. And so from him, it's not just giving money. Remember, he was even told to remember the poor in Jerusalem before he left. Paul was. Paul wanted to, or I should say, this gift was representative of showing that what he's doing out there in the world is connected to them there in Jerusalem. That this is all one movement. Paul is saying to his brothers and sisters, he's saying, you brothers and sisters are brothers and sisters in the Messiah. And you have other brothers and sisters in the Messiah who are not Jewish. And they love you. And they're thinking of you. And they want to share in the solidarity of your hardship. Now, I haven't read, but the story goes, as you know here, Paul enters Jerusalem, and he visits with James, starting in verse 17. And then he goes to the temple, and of course the church leaders are, well, let's send him to the temple because he's going to go anyway. Let's send him to the temple to go and be very pious and pay for these men's purifications along with his own. So he'll look like he's following the law, even though he knows he's not. And when there's an uproar, there's a riot, starting in verse 30. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together, and they seized Paul, and they dragged him out of the temple. And at once the gates were shut, and they were seeking to kill him. As they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all of Jerusalem was in a confusion. And at once he took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. Centurions, remember, they have 100 men underneath them. And so he's taking a whole bunch of people. And he ran down to them, and when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. That they respected the authority. Then the tribune came up and arrested him and ordered him bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd were shouting one thing, some another. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. This is the fortress Antonia. And when he came up the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. For the mob of people followed, crying out, "Away with him!" Let me keep reading here to the end of the chapter here. As Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, "May I ask something of you?" he said. "Do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian then, who recently stirred up a revolt and led 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness?" Paul replied, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people." And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motioned with his hand to the people, and there was a great hush, and he addressed them in the Hebrew language, saying, and then we get into chapter 22. Sophia, go. Dazzled by the light. There's sunlight outside. I need to go outside. All right. So, this visit is so important because Paul wants to bring this gift in, right? This Roman battalion or cohort is significant because the cohort in total was supposed to be 1,000 people. The name sort of battalion implies that. But by this point, Rome was already sort of slacking off on some of those numbers. And so 500, 600 people is a reasonable number. And so after correcting this Roman commander's mistake, his mistaken identity that he thought he was an Egyptian rebel, Paul asks and receives to address this angry crowd. And that's the end of it, right? He knocks some sense into them and everything's all right? No, right? It's not what happens. Because this is not the first time that Paul has been arrested. This is not the first time he's been arrested for what, though? For starting a revolution? No, not a military revolution, right? Paul is being arrested as a dangerous social revolutionary. Paul's message was groundbreaking, so much so that people were threatened. Philippi, Athens, Ephesus, Corinth, all these cities where he was arrested. Not only was Jesus the Jewish Messiah, but he was also king over all creation. This is Paul's message. So membership as a Jesus follower is not based on ethnic identity or following the laws of the Torah, but it was based on trusting and obeying Jesus. And that message had been viewed by the Romans as subversive to their way of life. Remember in chapter 17, all the way through chapter 18, when we're talking about Corinth, Paul in Corinth and in Athens. Paul is accused of rebellion. He's accused of treason against Caesar because he was claiming that there was another king. They were hearing Paul correctly. He was proclaiming that Jesus was king over all of mankind. But they also correctly understood that these Christian beliefs were a challenge to the cultural norms of the Roman system. And now the Jews feel the same way that the Romans felt. So the moment this commotion starts, these Roman soldiers come in to keep the peace. And Paul gets nabbed because they can see that all these people are angry at him. And this is a great part of the story. This Roman soldier, they start dragging Paul away, and all these people are rushing together trying to take Paul, and they drag him out of the temple, and they're going to kill him. This Roman soldier come and drag him back away from the people who are dragging him off. And when the people see these soldiers, they finally stop beating Paul. And the commander, they take hold of him and they bind him with 2 chains, not just 1, 2. And he's trying to find out what's going on. And the crowd shout, kill him and away with him. And they're taking him up the stairs, like out of the city streets and out of the courtyard of the Gentiles, is what it was called. And Paul starts talking to him in Greek, right? So he's just talking to the people in Aramaic, and now he's talking in Greek. And the commander's like, wait, you know Greek? And then he realizes, okay, this is not just some Jewish male from the city who's stirring up trouble. Paul says, no, man. I'm a Jew of Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no insignificant city. He's not talking about Tarsus being that insignificant city. He's making a reference to Rome. It's like saying, I am a U.S. citizen, or I'm an Alaska resident, and I live in the biggest state in the Union. Even though I didn't say Alaska when I said the biggest state in the Union, you know I'm from that city. Paul says, I'm from a very famous city. I'm a citizen of a very famous city. And that most famous city, of course, was Rome. Please let me speak to the people, Paul says. And the guy's like, okay, well, go ahead. They came arresting him, thinking that he was a rabble-rouser. But here, the rest of the book of Acts, the story of the book of Acts, is going to begin. Paul retells the great story of the gospel several times, from here in Acts 21 to the end of Acts 28, right? Luke has designed this story part, this section of the story, very, very deliberately. And this is really cool because I want you to see this. That the design of this section, what we call the literary or narrative design of this section, follows a very clear pattern. Just like when he was arrested, gave his defense, and then was set free or escaped in the middle of the night previously, we're going to have a very similar cycle that this is going to go through. There's going to be 6 cycles, and as always, each cycle will begin with Paul getting arrested or put on trial. And in every scene, there's a clear representative from the Roman or imperial system. The first few are Jewish. And in each of these 6 times, he gives a speech. And he always begins with the makeup of his audience. So in this first speech, he says, "Men of Israel." Or later on, when he's giving his defense in front of the Romans, he says, "Men of Rome." His skill as a speaker really comes out in these stories. Paul really knows how to work a room, we might say. And the speech always ends with this official going like, "Man, dang it, we can't do anything about this guy. He's not worthy of death. He's not breaking any laws. But every step of the way, he stays in prison and he's unjustly detained." And there's a message for us there, because this is where I want to end today, is on the slide here. There's a message for us. Step after step, he's unjustly detained. 6 different times this happens. The last quarter of the book of Acts is about these things. So what is Luke doing here? He has some focus. He has some reason why he's designed this book this way. Maybe you might say, "Well, that's because that's how it happened." Well, you'd be right, that's how it happened, but Luke didn't have to include every single detail, and doesn't include every single detail. But he includes certain details for certain reasons. And so for Luke, Paul becomes representative of the whole movement of these Christ followers. Paul is representative of their relationship to the governing authorities. And so for us, we can look to Paul as our ideal in how to deal with those powers. Just like we can look to Jesus at the end of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, now we can look to Paul as to how that plays out in everyday life. And in each time that we see Paul, these 6 times, in each case, the powers have to do something, because that's what governments do. We have to do something, right? They have to do something. But they recognize that they're not really dealing with something that's normal for them. They're not dealing with some kind of normal social movement, right? Because there's no violence. But at the same time, this movement is creating enough of a disturbance and an upheaval that we have to do something. So what do? And there's a lesson there for us today. And I want to ask you a couple questions. Is your life creating an upheaval in the world around you? I'm not saying that you have to be Paul and you have to be crazy. But if people don't ever question anything in your life, I would say that your Christianity is not coming out. I'm not asking you to go be a military threat. That's not what I'm asking. But we should be a social threat. We should be a social disturbance. And so Paul becomes this model to how we should navigate our lives. And how we need to navigate that tension in our lives and in the ongoing generations of this Jesus movement. Luke, or Paul, or God, however you want to say that, he is teaching followers of Jesus how to relate to the authorities, to the power structures that are around us. And he's doing that through the story of Paul. Paul's story is a vehicle. It's a way for him to talk about Christians and our relationship to our government and our relationship to the culture that is around us, to the power structures, and how we as Christians need to speak into the world. We need to speak the gospel, the good news of Jesus, into the world. It's so, so important because there is a way of living out there that is not, it is not surrounded by death. It is not, sorry, not surrounded. It is not, what's the word I'm looking for? Made up of death. It is not made up of actions that lead to pain and suffering. There is a way of living out there that is transformed from that back into what God wants us to be. There is a way of living that is a new humanity that has hope. The hope that we can one day live forever with Jesus. And you're not going to do that by living like a Roman. You're not going to do that by living like a U.S. citizen. You do that by having faith, by trusting and obeying Jesus, who is the Christ. That's the lesson for this morning from Acts chapter 21. Next week, we'll get into Paul's actual speeches, a couple of his speeches there, in Acts chapter 22. That's the lesson for this morning. It's good to have everybody here and online as well. We'll see you all next week. All right, let's grab our songbooks and turn to number 377. Yes.